Forcing your boss to hand over your personal phone number and email address to union bosses. That is exactly what the head of the National Labor Relations Board wants to do this year. Is this an invasion of workers' rights, and what will it mean for jobs? Well, hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl Casoni, and welcome to Cashin' In. Our Cashin' In crew this week, we've got Wayne Rogers, Jonathan Hoenig, Tracy Burns, and John Layfield. Also joining us this week, former senior advisor at the Treasury Department and columnist at the American Banker, Susan Ox. So welcome to all of you. And Wayne, I want to start with you. You're outraged over this. You're very frustrated. You say this is a flat-out invasion of privacy.
Well, of course it is. Anytime that you are asking our federal agency, mind you, an agency of the United States government is reaching in and telling somebody that you have to give information to them about one of your employees. This is a total invasion of privacy, an invasion of the free market system. Employee-employer relationship should be between those two people. It's like a marriage. Nobody has any business messing around in there. Now, the problem with it, the result of all of this is the result of all of this is the fact that the agency, by the giving to the union, in other words, the agency's not saying, you know, you're filing a tax return to the federal government. We got that information. We're making you give that information to the union so the union can organize you. I mean, you know, sweatshops disappeared in the 18th century. This is just a grab for power. It's a way for the president to get votes because he's got the unions he's engaged with them. Therefore, that's what he's trying to do. He's putting the pressure on them to do this. It's crazy. Your point. And it doesn't create jobs. It drives them overseas.
I see your point about the president, but at the same time, Tracy, the head of the NLRB says this is going to make the agency more efficient. It's going to help them run better, communicate directly with those that they're supposed to be overseeing, which is union members, taking care of them. What do you say?
Brainwashing them? I mean, what the heck? Listen to what you just said. That's crazy talk. Look, what's really interesting, though, is all this and the fact that we are talking about it gives the unions a bigger voice than they actually have. The membership is shrinking by the second. But by doing all this crazy stuff that, like Wayne says, harkens us back to the sweatshops, it gives the unions a voice and actually gives them still a position out there. They are the largest campaign contributors still to the president's re-election, and there probably will be again. And so, unfortunately, they are going to stick their faces where they don't belong. It is a complete invasion of privacy, though.
You know, Susan, the concern here from business leaders, some Republicans, but many business leaders in the country, is that this is not only an invasion of privacy, but it's giving too much power to the board and to unions, who many companies are already in a death knell fight when it comes to revenues.
Look, this proposal is really about making sure that companies are not being obstructionist towards unionizing activities. And there have been histories of that in the past. And so, you know, there's a really easy way to solve the privacy issue, which is that you let employees tell their employer that they want to opt out. Look, I don't want my name given to the union. But the idea that companies and the employees of those companies shouldn't be able to make sure that they all have a voice and are all able to participate in union activities, it's a little silly. I mean, what are the companies afraid of here?
Well, I think that with the issue of job creation, Jonathan Hoenig, I think what they're afraid of is that when you have unions, if you do have more powerful unions, a lot of times the financial cost to companies outweighs the idea that you can hire more employees. Would you rather hire more employees or have to deal with a union that could be cost prohibitive?
An added cost, and not just the union, Cheryl, to your point, but a whole really branch of government that is dedicated to serving not the individual, but the union. I mean, the very fact that we have an NLRB, once again, an arm of government specifically for the unions is absurd. It's certainly not in the Constitution. It was a product of, not surprisingly, FDR in that era. It's not a question of privacy, though, Cheryl. It's a question of property rights. The unions don't own the company. The shareholders own the company. That information is their property. And for government to come in through force and say, no, I'm sorry, you have to give it to someone else is patently absurd, and it's a terrible drain on the economy.
John Layfield, is this idea in your mind an anti-business idea?
not necessarily anti-business, it's just pro-union. They've been fighting over power struggles since the NLRA created the NLRB, as Jonathan said, under the FDR administration. And remember, the NLRA was deemed unconstitutional because it was such a gross expansion of federal powers. In 1946, you had 5 million people going on strike, was crippling the economy, and that's when the Taft-Hartley Act came in and limited what they said were radical people at the head of unions and limited their power. That created one of the biggest booms of the last century. This is simply a power grab by the unions. It's what they do. But it's also not, if you're negotiating against them, don't get out and negotiate here because you're crippling business if you do.
And you know what, Susan, to Wayne's point here, I mean, the unions, membership is dwindling. In fact, 36% of the public sector is unionized, only 6% of the private sector. So unions would love to see the private sector up their membership.
Right, but I think that it's getting so overblown. The idea that one particular provision like this is going to somehow start squashing job creation is ridiculous. I mean, to your point, it's only 6% of the private sector workforce.
But they would like to see it more. Unions are threatened. The idea of unions has become a threatened idea.
Right, but my point is, why should companies be afraid? If you're doing things the right way, there are a lot of unions that are doing really good things in their companies. And, in fact, the company that the president mentioned in the State of the Union address this week, Jonathan, hang on, let me finish. The company that he mentioned, Master Lock, is a union shop, and they actually are not only creating jobs, but they're bringing jobs back from China. So this is a union operation that's actually able to be competitive in the global marketplace, which is not the story that all the anti-union people want to promote.
Jonathan?
Listen, I have nothing against unions, Susan.
Really?
But unions
sounds
have.
Like you do.
Well, no, Susan, but they have no rights. I hope you'd agree that. They have no unique rights. They have rights as individuals. The employer makes an offer. Here's the job. The union can either take it or hit the bricks. And the fact that you would advocate government coming in and forcing the employers to act in a certain fashion, to me, isn't freedom at all.
This is about protecting workers' rights. This is not about forcing things.
But Wayne, the question is jobs. Wayne, you brought that up at the beginning. The question here is jobs. Is it jobs prohibitive?
Well, but let me address what Susan said. It is forcing them. If they make that the law, if the National Labor Relations Board makes that the law, that is forcing them. It's not the individual's choice, and that's an invasion of the individual's choice, and that's absolutely wrong, and it should be struck down. Now, when you come back to say, is this going to increase jobs? No, in fact, it will drive jobs overseas.
But
That's exactly
my point is that Master Lock specifically did it.
That's one example.
Excuse me 1 second.
That's one example, Wayne. Go ahead.
Excuse me. Master Lock, he picks one example out. Wow, I found something up here. Gee, I pick out Master Lock. I can go talk about that. Of every Master Lock, I'll name you 5 that doesn't do it.
Tracy?
Look, I think bottom line is nobody wants these, telemarketer teamsters calling them at home during dinner trying to drag me into their unions. I think what the majority of people realize at this point is unions have cost the economy a lot of money. We don't need worker protection anymore. We get that. We are in a very, very different world than when these unions were originally created. And so the cost to companies to protect themselves from all this is unfortunately taking away from hiring other people.
John Layfield, do you agree with that, though, what Tracy's saying here? Because what about the energy industry? Think of drilling, think of coal mines. But what about that group? I mean, where does unions fit into that very profitable group?
Well, look at car makers. Look at the airlines. Look at baseball. Those things were sunk by unions and those legacy costs that those unions had built up over decades. So you can pick and choose both sides of this. But if you want to see what Tracy's talking about, how right it is, look where money goes. New car manufacturers are going into the South where they don't have to deal with union states. Companies are building in states that are not unionized because they cannot simply afford the union legacy costs, which build up over decades. It's very simple. Where money goes where it's rewarded, and it's not going to union states.
You had me up until you used the word baseball, but anyway, coming up.
They almost killed baseball. Thank goodness for Mark McGwire and steroids.
All right, guys, coming up.